Welcome to EnRich Relationships, a podcast designed to help leaders improve their personal and professional relationships from a father and son team.
We each bring executive corporate experience in both public and private companies, as well as personal experience as brothers, fathers, and sons. I'm Dax Rich.
And I'm Larry Rich, and together we discuss different leadership skills and concepts that will help you at work and at home. This podcast will focus on protecting the relationship between you as the person delivering and the person who is receiving a hard conversation, be it family or be it an employee or employer. This podcast actually could fit in anywhere in that hard conversation timeline. It could come before, it could come during, and should actually come before, during, and after. In the podcast, focusing on starting a conversation and having a goal of where to take it, I shared an example that I'll share again in this particular podcast, and that is, consider, if you would, our discussion being like two nails. That first nail in a board, if you will. That first nail we put into the board represents the beginning point, or where we're going to start the conversation. And that second nail represents where we're going to end, or our goal of where we want to take that conversation. Now let's suppose that we take a string and we tie it and tie those two nails together. But let's do it loosely, not tight. Obviously, if it was tight, it would be easy. It would assume that we just start a conversation and we go right to our end point. That hardly ever, if ever, happens in the real world. But if that string's loose, we can move that string with our finger, and we can move it up, we can move it down, we can move it around. And that's typically what these conversations are going to be like. But I would suggest that that string really is the connecting point to a start and an end, representing our relationship with the person that we're having the conversation with. It's important that as we start out in that conversation, that we have a relationship with that person, be it our family member, be it a child, be it a spouse, if it's a professional work environment, if it's a colleague, if it's a superior, if it's a subordinate, that we have a relationship with them prior to having this conversation, so that as that string, and again, my finger moving that string back and forth between that beginning nail and that ending nail, that as that string moves forward and maybe gets tight, that we have a relationship so that we know where we started, we know where we're going, but we also know where that person is at and our relationship with that person. For example, let's suppose, for the sake of this podcast, that person is one of our children, and maybe there's something that they have not done. Maybe it's they haven't done their chore around the house, something that's important to do. The starting point, obviously, with that child is going to be, hopefully first in a home court advantage, hopefully in their bedroom or somewhere that they feel safe, that we can talk. But starting with that relationship, I so appreciate, or I love you, and I just feel like it's so important that you know how important you are in our family. If it was a colleague or a work, I so appreciate the opportunity to work with you, and there's things that are so important that we are able to do together, or I need your help to accomplish. And this is the reason why. Again, all those kind of things build our relationship from their perspective with us, but also potentially with our customers, or with others who are depending on them and us in our team. So protecting and building that relationship is essential, and then going in the direction of where that conversation, where our goal is with that conversation. Again, continually thinking about that relationship, because once we get there in the conversation, we still want to protect that relationship. It's assumed in a work environment that relationship is going to continue, and it is a definite in our family that relationship will continue.
And that's really where the hard conversation can be its most challenging. A lot of times we think the hard conversation starts when we open our mouths and ends when we close our mouths, and that's the end of it. But the truth of the matter is the hard conversation is what facilitates a discussion of feelings and a discussion of opinions. It allows us to understand the hearts of other people, and once we understand the heart of the other person, it's what we do next that decides the relationship. Once we walk away from that safe environment, once we turn off the video call, or we walk out of our child's bedroom, or we get out of the car with our spouse after having a hard conversation, that's where the rubber hits the road, and we need to decide how we're going to protect that relationship. We've understood that person at a very vulnerable point in their life or a very vulnerable point in their career. And so being able to understand that authentic part of the other person allows us to make decisions moving forward. When we have future hard conversations, will we approach it in the same light? When we are setting expectations with that person, do we need to provide more context? When we're thanking the other person, are we thanking them in the way that they would like to be thanked? We walk away from that relationship learning a lot more sometimes than just the end goal. Sometimes we walk away understanding that there's more to the other person than we may have previously thought. So protecting that relationship well extends beyond the conversation and will help in enriching future conversations. As we sit down after a hard conversation, maybe the next day or the next week, we can reflect with that person saying, thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for being authentic. And thank you for sharing some things with me that you may otherwise not have shared. I felt appreciated or I felt valued because of what you said. All of these are powerful words and phrases that allow the other person to feel validated and feel like it was important that they were authentic. What a great way to open up the floodgates of a relationship where now that person feels even more comfortable to turn to you. Even if the goal wasn't exactly the best for them. I think of, again, going back to a previous episode, we talked about if a direct report is consistently coming in late to work. If you have the right hard conversation with that individual where you say, by the end of this conversation, we need to figure out a way for you to be here on time to service the needs of your customer. It may involve them changing in a dramatic way, but because you've had that conversation, now you may understand that that person is going through a tough family situation, or maybe they just had a car that broke down and they've been Ubering to work or asking a coworker to drive them. And now that you know that, you can use what you've learned from that conversation to guide you in the next conversation and say, hey, thank you so much for sharing what's happened in your own personal life. I'm hoping things are working out for you, or validate what you've learned from that other person. And that's a really important way to not only protect the relationship, but enrich the relationship.
And I'd really like, Dax, to use the word clarify as you were describing these things. And I realized that that's a big difference from what many conversations, especially these that are more difficult, because many times they start off with the idea of a correction. And a correction implies that the person, first of all, thinks that something's wrong. And sometimes, and often, maybe they don't, or they don't understand. So I think more what you said about having a clarifying conversation can be very helpful, surrounded by the relationship, because the fact that we're clarifying something with our children, that we're clarifying something with our employee or our employer, says, I care about you and I want to develop this relationship with you, but I need clarification, or I need to give clarification so that we are on the same page, rather than I'm going to give correction, you're doing it wrong, you need to do it my way. And so I loved what you said about clarification versus correction, if you will.
Appreciate that. And we talk about relationship. In previous episodes, we talked about how a relationship is a two-way street. One other thought that I'd share with our listeners is the importance of accepting feedback like it's a gift. In a great hard conversation, there should be comments or thoughts shared from that other person that may be feedback for you. Maybe it's something you can do to improve your relationship with them. Maybe it's something you can do to invite a more welcoming home court advantage for that person, or create an environment where they feel more comfortable to talk to you in the future. If we embrace feedback, just as we're hoping that other person will embrace our own feedback, then we can facilitate a better relationship and facilitate a relationship that really does go both ways. This wraps up our series on hard conversations, but we'd like to share with you one additional episode that will talk about some of those frequently asked questions. We encourage you to listen to that episode, which will be coming very soon.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode, and be sure to check out our other episodes where we explore additional ways to enrich your relationships at work and with your family.
Before you take off, we invite you to subscribe and share what you liked from this episode with friends, colleagues, and family. Take a moment and share feedback and suggestions with us directly at enrichrelationshipspodcast@gmail.com.
Lasting change comes from enriching your relationships both at work and at home.